Black boy's shocking confession to judge leaves courtroom. Frozen. The morning light filtered through the narrow windows of Family Courtroom 6B in Fulton County, Georgia, illuminating the cold, sterile floors and the rows of worn-out wooden benches. The courtroom buzzed quietly with murmurs, shuffling papers, and the clipped heels of attorneys walking briskly across the tiled floor. Judge Evelyn Carter sat behind the elevated bench, her expression unreadable, eyes sharp behind her thin-rimmed glasses as she reviewed the file on her desk. At 47, Judge Carter was known across the state for her fierce objectivity, her ironclad memory for case law, and her ability to deliver verdicts that cut through the emotional fog like a scalpel. She had no children of her own, and though no one dared say it aloud, many whispered that perhaps that's what made her so ruthless. She didn't feel the same way about children as other judges did. But even Evelyn Carter couldn't deny the strange feeling curling at the base of her spine as she flipped open the file labeled Tyrese Holt, age 9. The boy sat at the front with his caseworker, shoulders hunched under a second-hand hoodie that looked 2 sizes too big. His hands clutched something in his lap, a small, crumpled photograph, and his eyes stared straight ahead, unmoving, unblinking. He hadn't spoken a word since being brought in. "Your Honor," began Mrs. Dalton, the foster mother, seated stiffly beside her husband. "We've tried everything we could. Family counseling, tutors, group activities. But Tyrese remains emotionally unavailable. He doesn't talk, doesn't play with the other children, he just shuts down." Judge Carter arched an eyebrow. "Emotionally unavailable," she repeated slowly. "You mean traumatized?" Mrs. Dalton shifted in her chair. "He bites when approached unexpectedly. Screams at night. Sometimes he speaks in whispers to the wall. We're not equipped for this." Mr. Dalton chimed in. "We're not behavioral specialists, Your Honor. We already have 2 children under our care." Carter glanced over at Tyrese again. He hadn't moved. His knuckles were white around the photo in his lap. His caseworker, Lana Ramirez, gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Tyrese?" she said softly. "Would you like to say anything today?" He said nothing. Carter took a breath. Something wasn't right. She could feel it, not just in the boy's posture, but in the way the room felt heavier than usual. She glanced at the file again. 7 foster homes in 5 years. Reports of neglect, erratic behaviors, refusal to eat. Several unexplained injuries. All brushed off as accidents. "Ms. Ramirez," Carter said, her voice steady, "has anyone investigated Tyrese's original placement records? His biological family? The circumstances under which he entered the system?" Ramirez frowned. "The records are fragmented, Your Honor. He was dropped off at a fire station as an infant. No name, no papers. We only have a hospital tag found with him that read Holt. The name was assigned based on that. No DNA testing, no birth certificate, nothing that led anywhere conclusive." Judge Carter leaned back in her chair, letting silence stretch across the room. It wasn't the first time she'd seen a child buried under the weight of a broken system. But there was something about this one, Tyrese Holt, something that gnawed at her instincts like a loose thread waiting to unravel. "Very well," she said finally. "I'll be meeting with the child privately in chambers before deciding on this petition." There were murmurs among the court staff. Mrs. Dalton looked mildly annoyed, but Carter didn't care. Court recessed. Back in her chambers, Judge Carter stood at the window, watching as Tyrese was brought in, his small form dwarfed by the massive leather armchair he was asked to sit in. Lena remained standing beside him. "Would you like some water?" Carter asked. Tyrese shook his head almost imperceptibly. She tried a different approach. "Do you know why you're here today?" His gaze slowly lifted, eyes meeting hers for the first time. They were dark, wide, and far too knowing for a 9-year-old. Carter felt something twist in her gut. "They want to move me again," he said quietly. It was the first time he'd spoken. "Yes," Carter answered. "They say you're not adjusting." He didn't respond, just stared down at the photograph again. "Who's that in the picture?" she asked gently. "My mom." Carter's breath hitched. "You remember her?" Tyrese nodded. "Her name's Andrea." Ramirez quickly flipped open her folder, confused. There's no mention of a biological mother named Andrea in his records. Carter's eyes narrowed. "Tyrese? Do you remember her face, or just the name?" "She sang to me," he said. "At night, before they took me." Ramirez glanced up. He was an infant when he entered the system. "There's no way!" But Carter raised a hand, silencing her. "Tyrese," she said softly, "why haven't you told anyone this before?" "Because they said if I talked, they'd make her disappear forever." The room fell silent. Ramirez turned pale. Carter stepped closer. "Who said that?" He looked up again, eyes suddenly sharp. "The woman at the hospital. The one who took me. She had red hair. She told me my mom died. But she didn't. I saw her once, on TV. She was giving a speech about helping kids. She said her name was Judge Carter." Every sound in the room disappeared. Carter froze. "What did you just say?" Tyrese held up the photo, his hands trembling. "You're my mom." Ramirez gasped. Carter's knees nearly gave way. She took the photo from him with shaking fingers. It was old, a bit faded. But the image was unmistakable. It was her, 15 years younger, sitting in a hospital bed, holding a swaddled newborn. She had never seen this photo before. Her vision blurred. Her mind raced. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "A nurse gave it to me when I was little. She told me to hide it. Said someday I'd find you." Carter felt the blood drain from her face. "I had a baby," she said aloud, as if just remembering. "I was told he died at birth. Emergency delivery, no visitors allowed. I was sedated. I signed a death certificate I never saw." Ramirez stared, stunned. "You're saying they faked it?" Carter turned to Tyrese, eyes burning with disbelief. "You're saying you're that baby?" He nodded slowly. "You knew?" Her voice broke. "You remembered?" "I never forgot," he whispered. And in that instant, Judge Evelyn Carter, a woman known for logic, for reason, for cold detachment, felt her entire world tilt off its axis. A secret child, a faked death, a boy stolen, shuffled through a broken system designed to forget him. She knelt before him slowly, her eyes level with his. "Tyrese," she said, tears now spilling freely, "I will find out the truth. I promise you, I will not let them take you away again." He nodded. "You already didn't," he said. "You found me!" And just like that, the courtroom queen with a heart of stone had become something else entirely. A mother. The story wasn't over. It had only just begun. The air in Judge Evelyn Carter's chambers was thick with silence. The photograph trembled in her hands, its faded edges digging into her fingers like a cruel reminder of something she had buried years ago. On the back of it, written in faint pencil, were the words, "Andrea Carter, June 14th. That was her handwriting. That was her signature. But she had no memory of ever holding that baby, no memory of anyone taking that picture. Tyrese sat quietly in the armchair across from her, feet dangling above the floor, hands folded in his lap now that the photograph had been taken. He didn't look away. His gaze remained fixed on her with the calm patience of a child who had waited too long for the truth to finally find him. Lena Ramirez, still standing by the door, was pale. "Your Honor," she said slowly, carefully. This has to be some kind of mistake." "I thought so too," Carter replied. Her voice was low, but it held no hesitation. 8 years ago, I was told my son was stillborn. I never saw him. I was sedated for days. I asked to see the body, and they told me it had already been taken away. I didn't ask again. "And this child just happens to show up in your courtroom today?" Ramirez asked, as if saying it aloud might dissolve the absurdity of the situation. But it didn't feel absurd. It felt terrifyingly possible. "I want a copy of every document tied to Tyrese's initial placement," Carter said, standing abruptly. "Hospital records, foster intake files, anything from the Department of Children and Family Services. And I want it by the end of the day." Ramirez blinked. "Judge, I'm not sure that's within protocol." Carter turned to her, something fierce flashing in her eyes. "This is no longer a matter of protocol. If there was a criminal act involved in the removal of this child from his mother, who may have been me, we're looking at a felony-level conspiracy." Ramirez didn't argue. As she turned to leave, Carter knelt back down to Tyrese. "Do you remember anything else?" "Anyone else?" He hesitated, then nodded. "There was a lady. She smelled like flowers. Her name was Miss Nina. She gave me peanut butter crackers and told me to keep the photo safe. She said one day it would get me back to you." "Nina." Carter whispered the name, rolling it across her mind. "You don't remember her last name?" Tyrese shook his head, but the details stuck. Evelyn Carter had spent nearly 2 decades dissecting testimony in court. And if there was one thing she could still trust about herself, it was that she knew when someone was telling the truth. This boy wasn't guessing. He remembered. Back in the courtroom later that afternoon, whispers had already begun circulating among the clerks and bailiffs. People could feel something had shifted. A fire had lit behind the judge's usual steel gaze. The way she gripped the gavel, the way her eyes scanned the room, too sharp, too focused. When the Turners were brought back in to resume the hearing, Patricia Turner barely concealed her irritation. "I thought we were here to finalize placement termination," she said, tossing her hair back as if she were done playing nice. Carter didn't even glance up from the documents. "You were—" "But this case is now under further review." Harold Turner scoffed. "We did what we could. We gave that boy everything. Private school, clean clothes, therapy." "Did you ever ask him who he was?" Carter asked without looking up. "What's that supposed to mean?" Patricia snapped. "I mean," Carter said, now locking eyes with them, "did you ever stop treating him like a defective rescue project and start treating him like a person who remembered something important?" Harold opened his mouth, but Carter didn't give him the chance. "Because I spoke with him today," she said. "And he remembered things, specific things, names, smells, songs, a photograph." Ramirez cleared her throat behind her, nervously holding a file folder. Carter took it, flipped it open, and read in silence for a moment before continuing. The file from New Horizons Foster Agency, the agency that first placed Tyrese, claims he was a foundling with no documentation. But this birth report, she held up a copy of a yellow document with hospital insignia, was buried inside the intake folder, hidden behind 3 pages of blank intake notes. It's dated the same week I gave birth, at the same hospital. A boy, unnamed, weight matches. Length matches. The courtroom went still. I want every person who handled his case interviewed. Every administrator. Every nurse. Every social worker who touched his file. Patricia bristled. Are you seriously suggesting that child is your son? I'm not suggesting anything, Carter said coldly. I'm investigating a lead. But he's unstable, Harold barked. He screams in his sleep. He zones out. He talks to walls. He's 9, Carter cut in, and he's been abandoned 7 times. Maybe the instability is ours, not his. Harold stood up, clearly agitated. This is insane. Sit down, Carter said, and her voice cracked like thunder through the courtroom. This court is not adjourned. Tyrese sat in the back row now, flanked by a court officer and Ramirez. His small frame was still, but his eyes followed every word, every shift in the room. For the first time, he looked like someone who had been heard. Carter set the gavel down gently. I'm issuing a temporary suspension on all placement changes for Tyrese Holt, pending a full investigation. Until then, he will remain in the care of court-appointed guardianship. Harold Turner leaned forward. You mean, with you? I mean exactly that, Carter replied. As of this moment, he's under judicial protection. The Turners looked like they wanted to protest, but the weight of Carter's authority pinned them to their chairs. She turned to Tyrese once more. We'll figure this out. Together. And in that moment, something changed. Not just in the courtroom, but in Carter herself. She had spent her entire career fighting to uphold a system she thought was about fairness and truth. But now she was beginning to suspect that system had betrayed them both. And for the first time in a very long time, Judge Evelyn Carter realized the greatest case of her career wasn't one she would preside over. It was one she was about to live. The first thing Judge Evelyn Carter did after suspending Tyrese's placement was return to her private chambers and shut the door behind her. Not gently, not calmly. She slammed it. For 15 seconds she stood frozen, hands trembling, breath ragged, staring at the photograph on her desk. Her own image stared back at her from 8 years ago, tired but glowing, cradling a newborn in a hospital bed. She still didn't remember the moment it was taken. That picture shouldn't even exist. According to every document she had signed, that baby had never lived. But it did. He was alive. He was here. And his name was Tyrese Holt. Evelyn collapsed into the leather chair behind her desk and pulled open a drawer she hadn't touched in years. Inside were things she'd sealed away when grief became too sharp to handle. A knit blue baby cap, the one she'd asked to keep. A hospital bracelet still bearing her name, and the death certificate. A piece of paper that now felt like a lie carved in ink. She stared at it, examined the handwriting. It was signed by a Dr. Thomas W. Halbrook. A name she didn't recognize, a name she intended to remember now. Evelyn picked up her phone and dialed a number from memory. After 2 rings, a gruff voice answered. Marcus Chen. Marcus, it's Evelyn Carter. I need your help. Marcus had once been an investigator for the DA's office, now working private sector. One of the few people Evelyn still trusted. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. What's going on? I think my son, who I was told died 8 years ago, was stolen from me, and I think he just showed up in my courtroom as a foster child. There was silence on the line for a beat. Then, you want me to trace the hospital records? Everything. The hospital, the doctor, the agency that handled his intake, the foster system. I want to know who touched this file, when, and why. You think it was a trafficking case? I don't know, yet. But this boy remembers a woman named Nina, a nurse. He had a photo of me I've never seen. And the name on the death certificate? It wasn't the OB I remember. It was someone else. Halbrook. I'll start there. And Evelyn? Yes? If what you're saying is true, it goes deep. She hung up and stood. Her reflection in the mirror across the room startled her. She didn't look like a judge. She looked like a mother unraveling. Which, for the first time, she was. When she returned home that evening, Tyrese was already there, seated quietly at her kitchen table, a glass of milk in front of him, and a crustless peanut butter sandwich untouched. Lena Ramirez sat across from him, phone in hand, catching up on emails but keeping one eye on the boy. How was he? Evelyn asked. Quiet, but calm, Lena replied. He hasn't spoken much, just asked where you were, and if he was going to have to go back to the group home. He's not, Evelyn said, her tone firmer than intended. He's staying here. That night, after Lena left, Evelyn took Tyrese upstairs to the guest room. She hadn't had time to prepare it for a child. There were no stuffed animals, no posters, just a neutral gray comforter and a desk with a reading lamp. He didn't seem to mind. Do you want me to leave the door open? She asked, adjusting the pillow. He hesitated, then nodded. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Judge Carter. She turned back. You don't have to call me that here. He stared at the floor. Then, what should I call you? It felt like all the air in the room disappeared. She walked over and knelt beside the bed. Her voice cracked when she said, You can call me Evelyn. Or, if you want, something else. When you're ready. He nodded, but didn't answer. Then, just as she was about to stand, he whispered, Can I show you something? He reached under the pillow and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Evelyn opened it. It was a drawing, crayon on lined notebook paper. It showed a small boy holding the hand of a tall woman in a black robe with a gavel in the other hand. Above them, in shaky block letters, was one word, found. Evelyn couldn't breathe. You drew this? She asked. He nodded. When? Last year. I used to dream about it. That night, Evelyn didn't sleep. She sat in her office, lights low, combing through Tyrese's files and her own hospital records from 8 years ago. There were discrepancies, subtle but clear to her trained eyes. The signature on the death certificate didn't match the one on the admittance form. There was no autopsy report. The cause of death was listed vaguely as fetal distress, without accompanying medical documentation. She had trusted the system, trusted her own hospital. She never imagined she'd need to verify the death of her own child. Until now. The next morning, her phone rang. It was Marcus. I found Halbrook. He retired 4 years ago. Lives in Tampa. And Evelyn? You're going to want to hear this. He worked closely with a private foster agency called Safe Start, shut down 2 years ago for financial fraud. Guess who processed Tyrese's initial intake? Safe Start. Bingo. And there's more. That nurse, Nina? Her full name was Nina Calloway. She worked NICU at your hospital. Her license was suspended 6 years ago. Medical misconduct. She's off the grid now, but I'm tracking. Evelyn closed her eyes, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. You think they were part of a baby trafficking ring? I think they were part of something big, Marcus said. And if Tyrese really is your son, then it means they weren't just taking abandoned babies. They were taking wanted ones. Evelyn felt sick. We need to talk to Halbrook. I'll book a flight. No, she said. I'm going with you. Are you sure? This isn't a case anymore. This is personal. As she hung up, Evelyn turned to see Tyrese standing in the doorway, still in his pajamas, clutching the crayon drawing. "Where are you going?" he asked. "I have to talk to someone," she said. "Someone who might know what happened to you. To us. Are you coming back?" The question nearly broke her. "Always," she promised. "I will always come back." He nodded, quietly satisfied. And then, just as she started to turn away, he spoke again. "Can I call you Mom?" The word landed like a thunderclap in her chest. She didn't cry. Not right away. She walked back, knelt down, and wrapped him in her arms. "Yes," she whispered. "You can." And for the first time in 9 years, Tyrese Holt fell asleep without fear. And Evelyn Carter, once a judge bound only by law, now found herself bound by something deeper. Truth, blood, and the unshakable bond between a mother and her stolen child. The flight to Tampa was silent, except for the quiet drone of the engines and the occasional clink of plastic cups. Evelyn Carter sat next to the window, her hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on the clouds rolling past. She hadn't told anyone at the courthouse she was leaving, only that she had a personal matter requiring immediate travel. It was the first time in her judicial career that she had prioritized her heart over her docket. Next to her, Marcus Chen reviewed files on his tablet. He didn't speak much either. He knew what was at stake. They were headed to confront a man who had signed a death certificate for a child who hadn't died, and if the rest of the threads they were pulling unraveled the way he suspected, Dr. Halbrook wasn't just negligent. He was complicit. When they landed, Marcus rented a black SUV and drove them to a gated retirement community just outside the city. It was pristine, the kind of place designed to make you forget anything bad ever happened. But Evelyn wasn't here to forget. The house was a cream-colored stucco with neatly trimmed hedges and a flag flying by the door. Halbrook answered in khakis and a golf shirt, his white hair combed back, a drink in one hand. "You're not from the HOA," he said dryly, eyeing Marcus. "And you don't look like Jehovah's Witnesses. So what do you want?" Evelyn stepped forward. "We need to talk about Riverside Memorial. And a death certificate you signed in 2015 for a baby named Carter." His face didn't twitch, not a flicker of recognition. "I signed hundreds of death certificates." "I'm not talking about paperwork," she said. "I'm talking about my son." His eyes narrowed. "I think you should leave." Marcus stepped in. "Doctor, refusing to speak will make you look guilty. And we already have records linking you to Safe Start." Halbrook hesitated, then sighed and stepped aside. "5 minutes," he muttered. "Then you're out." They sat in his living room, pristine leather furniture and golf trophies lining the mantel. He poured himself another drink but didn't offer them any. "I was told my son died during birth," Evelyn said. "Emergency C-section." "I never saw his body. Just a nurse telling me it was better that way. You signed the certificate." "But he's alive. His name is Tyrese now. He showed up in my courtroom last week." Halbrook exhaled slowly. "So it finally caught up." "Excuse me?" He leaned forward, rubbing his temples. "You think this was my idea? I was brought in on the tail end." "Administrative signature. They told me the mother was unconscious, the baby stillborn, paperwork already prepped. I didn't ask questions." "But you knew," Evelyn said coldly. "You had to know something was off." He met her eyes for the first time. "I suspected, but by then I was in too deep." Marcus's voice was hard. "Too deep in what?" Halbrook looked at him. "It wasn't just about one baby. Safe Start worked with doctors, nurses, even social workers. They identified newborns they thought would be high value. Good genetics, young mothers, educated backgrounds, no strong family support. Then they fabricated stillbirths, told the mothers the baby didn't survive, forged the death certificates, and funneled the babies into the foster system through fake agencies. Then sold them in private adoptions. And you signed off on this? Evelyn's voice trembled. I was told they were abandoned babies, he replied too calmly. Unwanted. Given a better life. I didn't ask questions I didn't want answers to. Who was running it? Director of Neonatal Administration was one of them, a guy named Leonard Keene. And a nurse named Nina Calloway. She handled the transfers. They had a system. Evelyn stood abruptly. Where's Nina now? Halbrook shook his head. Disappeared. After Safe Start got shut down, she vanished. Changed her name. I haven't seen her in years. You're going to testify, Marcus said. Everything you just told us. You're going to put it on record. No, Halbrook said, standing up. I'm retired. I'm not getting dragged into a legal firestorm over something I can't undo. Evelyn stepped close to him. Then I'll make sure every name you signed, every record you falsified, becomes part of a federal investigation. I don't care how many golf clubs you belong to. If you don't cooperate, you'll be spending your retirement behind bars. The air in the room tightened. Halbrook's hands trembled. Then, slowly, he nodded. I'll talk to the FBI. But I want immunity. No promises, Marcus said. But if you help us stop this, you might get something close. Back at the hotel that night, Evelyn stood on the balcony, phone pressed to her ear. Tyrese's voice came through the line, small and tired. Did you find him? Yes, she said softly. And he told us things. Important things. We're going to find the others. Others like me? Yes. Good. No one should feel like that. She felt her throat tighten. You won't ever feel that way again. I miss you. I'll be home soon. I saved a seat for you at breakfast. She smiled through her tears. Save me too, I might want seconds. After the call, she sat down and closed her eyes. They had confirmation now. Names, leads. Marcus was already arranging meetings with federal agents. But Evelyn knew this went beyond investigations. This was about justice. For Tyrese. For herself, and for every child stolen under a system that was supposed to protect them. As the night deepened, she made a promise to herself. No matter what it took, she would expose every single person who had buried the truth. Because her son had already lost 8 years. He wasn't losing another minute. The courthouse hallway was abuzz as Judge Evelyn Carter stepped inside the back entrance the next morning, escorted by Marcus Chen and 2 federal agents. There were whispers already, the kind that rippled through an institution when it sensed a reckoning. What happened in Tampa wasn't just a lead. It was confirmation of a decades-long conspiracy buried under layers of bureaucracy and silence. But what Evelyn hadn't expected was what was waiting on her desk. A letter. No envelope. Typed on plain white paper. You don't want to start a war you can't win. Some secrets are best left buried. No name. No signature. But it was enough to make her hands tremble slightly as she passed it to Marcus. This was on my desk when I came in. He scanned it quickly, then met her eyes. They're watching, we're close. She nodded. Too close, apparently. They had enough now to open formal inquiries. But Evelyn knew that wasn't enough. If they moved too slowly, the evidence could disappear. People could disappear. What they needed was a statement. Someone credible, someone inside the system who would go public and couldn't be ignored. Someone like Tyrese. He had stayed home from school that day, under the protection of Agent Lisa Taylor and a rotating security team. Evelyn returned to her house just after noon. Tyrese was at the kitchen table, staring at a photo album Jenny Kirkland had dropped off earlier that morning. It was full of babies, faces frozen in time. Many had no names. "Do you recognize any of them?" she asked softly. Tyrese didn't answer right away. He pointed to a photo of a pale-skinned baby girl with a birthmark on her cheek. "I think her name was Mia. She used to be with me. At the Wilsons. She cried all the time. Then one day she was just gone. Do you know where she went?" He shook his head. "Mrs. Wilson said she got adopted, but she looked scared when she said it." Evelyn sat beside him, pulling the album closer. "Tyrese, I need to ask you something. Something important." His shoulders tensed. She continued gently. "Would you be willing to talk to the FBI? Tell them what happened, what you saw in those homes?" Tyrese looked up at her, his eyes older than they should have been. "Will it help the others?" "Yes." "It might save them." He gave a small nod. "Then I'll do it, but only if you're there. Always." Later that afternoon, Evelyn and Marcus met with Agent Taylor in a secure conference room inside the FBI field office. Tyrese sat between them, his legs swinging above the floor, a cup of hot cocoa in front of him. A child psychologist was in the room too, ready to intervene if it became too much. "Tyrese," Taylor began, her voice soft, "can you tell us what happened at the Wilsons?" He glanced at Evelyn, who nodded encouragingly. Then he began. At first, his words came haltingly, but as he spoke, they poured out, stories of locked closets, of punishments for speaking about old lives, of being moved at night with no explanation. He talked about Mia and Jamal, and a girl named Tessa who once said she remembered a woman with red nails singing to her. And then the name came. "Nina," he said. "One of the nurses. She was the one who gave me the photo of my mom, but she told me not to tell anyone." Evelyn leaned forward. "Are you sure it was Nina?" He nodded. She had a badge. It said Riverside. Marcus and Agent Taylor exchanged a look. That was it. The connection they needed. Nina Calloway, the nurse Halbrook mentioned, was alive. And she had seen Tyrese, maybe more. By evening, the task force had issued a trace alert on Nina Calloway, pulling DMV records, credit reports, and known aliases. Within hours, they located a woman living under the name Linda Carr in Mobile, Alabama. She worked part-time at a health clinic and had a sealed record from a wrongful termination lawsuit, filed the same year Safe Start collapsed. "She's our ghost," Marcus said. "If she talks, this whole operation falls like dominoes." Evelyn didn't sleep that night. Her mind replayed everything. Tyrese's confession, the threats, the photo of Mia. Her son had survived a system built to erase him, but others were still inside it. At dawn, her phone rang. "We have her," Agent Taylor said. "She's in custody." Evelyn's heart slammed into her ribs. "Is she talking?" "Not yet, but she asked for you." By noon, Evelyn sat across from Nina Calloway in a federal holding room. The woman looked tired, her eyes hollow. Her hands shook as she reached for the paper cup of water. "I didn't know he'd survive," she whispered. "I tried to save at least one. I thought if I gave him that photo, maybe one day he'd find you." "Why didn't you speak up?" Evelyn asked, her voice tight with years of grief. Nina's eyes filled with tears. "Because the people behind this don't forgive. I watched 2 nurses disappear after asking questions. One was my sister." Marcus stepped in. "We can protect you now, but we need your testimony. We need records, names, everything." "I kept a file," she said. "Buried it," Just in case I ever needed to run, it's yours. That night, Evelyn sat on the porch, Tyrese curled up next to her, watching stars blink into view. Do you think they'll believe her? He asked. They'll have to, she said. And in her heart, Evelyn made another vow. They weren't just building a case anymore. They were starting a movement. The following morning, the air in the courtroom felt different. Tense, alert. Word had quietly spread throughout the city's legal and political networks that Judge Evelyn Carter was moving forward with a sealed emergency hearing, one that involved both federal authorities and explosive new evidence. Most people didn't yet know the details, but the rumors alone had been enough to draw eyes. Tyrese sat outside Evelyn's chambers in a tucked-away room, guarded by a plainclothes FBI agent and accompanied by Sarah Martinez, the same social worker who had first walked him into the system. This time, her presence wasn't about placing him in another temporary home. It was about making sure he stayed safe, grounded, and heard. Inside the judge's chambers, Evelyn stood beside Agent Lisa Taylor and Marcus Chen, staring at the folders Nina Calloway had handed over just hours ago. It wasn't just a few notes or memories scribbled down in fear. It was a timeline. Names, documents, a web. Nina kept copies of transfer paperwork, signatures from hospital directors, sealed birth certificates with mismatched dates, even payout ledgers from Safe Start to private adoption agencies. She wasn't just watching. She was documenting, Marcus said, flipping through one of the scanned files. And this proves your son's case wasn't an isolated mistake. It was standard practice. Evelyn's throat tightened. We have enough to indict half the people who worked in child protective services during those years. We will, Agent Taylor said, placing a calming hand on her shoulder. But we need to move carefully. Nina's safety is our top priority now. She's in a secure location, but we've received word that several of the individuals named in her files have already tried to flee the state. Evelyn nodded. Then we don't wait. I want the DOJ briefed by noon. Marcus tapped his tablet. Already scheduled. I'm flying to D.C. tonight to deliver a full copy of the archive. But there's one more thing. Tyrese's testimony. The file mentions an unlicensed psychiatric facility where some of the problem children were sent after they remembered too much. It's not just adoption fraud anymore. This is medical negligence, human rights abuse. Before Evelyn could reply, the courtroom clerk knocked twice and opened the door. Your Honor, Ms. Turner and Mr. Turner are here. So is the counsel from the State Child Welfare Division. Evelyn's gaze sharpened. Bring them in. Patricia and Harold Turner entered the chamber dressed to impress, with their attorney Thomas Haskins trailing behind. Gone was their previous smug superiority. They now looked like people walking into a storm and just realizing their umbrellas were made of paper. Judge Carter, Haskins began, I must protest this proceeding. My clients were summoned without proper notice. This isn't a trial, Mr. Haskins, Evelyn interrupted, cool and composed. It's a fact-finding hearing. But what we uncover today may very well become the foundation of several trials. Now sit down. Patricia's eyes narrowed. We've done nothing wrong. We provided care, stability. Evelyn stared at her. You provided performance. Not care, and the evidence says you were being paid to play your role. Harold shifted uncomfortably. We didn't know about the origins of the adoption. We believed everything was legal. Marcus slid a photo across the table. A screenshot from a wire transfer received by the Turners just 3 weeks after Tyrese was placed in their home. $35,000, marked only as post-placement maintenance. That's not child welfare. That's hush money. Patricia's jaw tightened. We weren't the only ones. You think we were running this alone? No, Evelyn said. But you were complicit. And what you did to Tyrese, the threats, the locked doors, the forced silence, wasn't just neglect. It was deliberate conditioning. And now he remembers everything. As if on cue, Tyrese's voice came from the doorway. He stepped into the room, escorted by Agent Taylor. His hands trembled slightly, but his chin was lifted. "I want to speak." Haskins stood immediately. "Absolutely not. He's a minor, and my clients will not be subjected to—" Evelyn raised her hand. "He's here voluntarily, and under federal protection. You will sit. And you will listen." The room quieted. Tyrese walked slowly to the front of the room, facing the Turners. He didn't shout. He didn't cry, but every word hit like a hammer. "You said I was broken. You told people I couldn't remember anything, that I was dangerous. But I wasn't. I just remembered the wrong things, like the smell of the room where you kept us when we talked about our real moms, or the sound of the chain you put on the door at night." He paused, turning to look at Evelyn. "And I remember my mother, her voice, her lullaby. The way she looked at me the first time we met in court. I knew right away." Evelyn blinked hard. Across the room, even Agent Taylor's expression cracked. Harold shifted, clearing his throat. "None of this proves you hit me," Tyrese said suddenly, his voice louder. "Twice. The second time, you made me say it was an accident, or I'd lose dessert for a week." Evelyn leaned forward. "We have medical photos from the ER visit. The hospital marked it suspicious." "You told them he fell." Harold looked pale now. "He's lying." "Then why?" Marcus said, sliding another document across the table. "Did your bank account show a payment to Dr. Ellis 2 days later? The same doctor who cleared the report as non-abuse-related trauma." Patricia was shaking her head. "We were told to handle it quietly." "By whom?" Silence. Tyrese turned back to Evelyn. "I want them to know I'm not afraid anymore." "You don't have to be," she said, rising from her seat. "Court is now adjourned." She didn't say the words for legal effect. She said them like a sword coming down, cutting through the layers of silence that had allowed people like the Turners to hide behind polite society for years. As the room emptied, Tyrese remained beside her. His shoulders relaxed for the first time in days. "I did it, didn't I?" "You did more than that," she said. "You started a chain reaction." And as she looked toward the hallway, where reporters already gathered, where agents whispered updates about arrests happening in other cities, she realized this wasn't just Tyrese's moment of truth. It was the beginning of a reckoning, one that no one would see coming. The weight of everything that had unraveled over the past few days bore down on Judge Evelyn Carter like a storm cloud. But it wasn't exhaustion she felt. It was momentum. Truth had finally found its voice in Tyrese. Now it was about to echo through halls far bigger than her courtroom. That morning, she stepped into a high-level emergency meeting at the U.S. District Court, escorted by Agent Lisa Taylor. They were joined by federal prosecutors, DOJ officials, and representatives from the Department of Health and Human Services. At the head of the table was Deputy Attorney General Carla Monroe, a woman with steel gray hair and an expression carved from granite. Evelyn laid out everything: Nina's files, Marcus's timeline of financial transactions, Tyrese's testimony, and the growing list of children who had resurfaced in the system with falsified paperwork. Monroe listened in silence for nearly 20 minutes before speaking. "This isn't just a local scandal. This is a nationwide network built to exploit the most vulnerable. If what you've brought here holds up, we're looking at charges ranging from conspiracy and fraud to human trafficking and obstruction of justice." "It will hold," Agent Taylor said, "and there's more coming." Monroe turned her gaze toward Evelyn. "You're sure the boy is yours?" "The DNA tests confirmed it." But the moment I saw him, I didn't need them. I knew. There was a pause. Then Monroe nodded. Then I need you to prepare yourself, Judge Carter, because this doesn't stop with the Turners or Safe Start. This touches hospitals, judges, adoption agencies, private security firms, even state senators. You're about to go to war with a machine built to bury people like you. I know, Evelyn said softly. But I have something they don't. What's that? A son who remembered everything. Later that day, Evelyn returned home to find Tyrese on the floor of her study, carefully arranging the baby photos Jenny Kirkland had provided in a neat row. His eyes lit up when she entered. I figured out the timeline, he said excitedly. Look, this one was from the hospital, then this one was with the first family, the ones who didn't talk much. Evelyn sat beside him. You're building your story. I don't want to forget any of it. Not the bad parts either, because they're part of what made me strong. Her chest ached with pride. I'm so proud of you. Are they going to jail? He asked, suddenly serious. They will, she replied, but there are a lot of people we still have to bring into the light, people who thought they were untouchable. That night, Marcus arrived with a folder marked Confidential. He looked tired, but focused. You were right, he said, setting it on Evelyn's desk. The judge who fast-tracked the Turners' placement with Tyrese wasn't just corrupt. He was laundering approvals for Safe Start. We found a series of expedited adoptions signed without oversight. Some of the children involved have since gone missing from the system altogether. Evelyn flipped through the documents, her fingers tightening as she saw the judge's name. Harold M. Redding. I sat on the same judicial panel as this man for 2 years, she said, her voice low, and I never saw it. He was good at hiding it, Marcus replied. But someone always leaves a trail, and Tyrese just gave us the map. The next morning, Evelyn held a private hearing in her chambers, attended by the U.S. Attorney's Office, select media outlets, and a handful of families who had reached out after hearing the news. One of those families was the Dawsons. Janet Dawson, a soft-spoken woman in her late 30s, stood holding a photo of a child she hadn't seen since 2016. They told me he died during delivery, that he didn't make it. But when I saw Tyrese on the news holding that same hospital blanket, I knew. My son was born in that same room. Evelyn looked her straight in the eyes. We're going to find him. Janet trembled. What if it's too late? Evelyn reached across the bench, her voice firmer than it had ever been in court. We found my son after 8 years. It's never too late. By the end of the day, more stories came in. A woman in Detroit, a family in Dallas, a single father in Atlanta who had been told his daughter had been placed in protective custody, only to never see her again. The pattern was clear. This was a systemic operation stretching far beyond the boundaries of Evelyn's jurisdiction. Tyrese watched it all unfold from the periphery, slowly realizing that what he had spoken in that courtroom, what he remembered, wasn't just helping him. It was helping others. I want to help the other kids, he told Evelyn that evening, even the ones who don't remember yet. We will, she said, brushing his hair back gently. But you've already done more than you know. Can I tell them something? He asked, sitting up straighter. Like, on the news? What would you say? I'd say, if you remember something that feels like it matters, even if no one believes you, don't let it go. Because remembering is the first step to finding your way home. Evelyn felt her throat close. This boy, this child who had once been locked away and silenced, was now becoming a voice for hundreds. Later that night, as the city lights flickered below them and the hum of distant sirens passed through the windows, Evelyn watched her son sleep. He had survived something no child should ever have to endure. And now, he was leading them all towards something that had once seemed impossible. Justice. Not just for himself, but for every child who had been forgotten, every parent told to move on, every family torn apart by greed and lies. The courtroom was no longer just a place of rulings, it had become a battlefield, and Evelyn Carter, once a grieving mother in black robes, now stood at the center of a storm with a child by her side whose voice had shattered silence. And together, they were rewriting the rules. The morning sun filtered through the high windows of the federal courthouse in downtown Washington, D.C., throwing long, pale light across the marble floors. The day had come. Evelyn Carter stood outside courtroom 12B with Tyrese at her side, his small hand wrapped tightly around hers. He wore a navy suit, slightly too big in the shoulders, and a calm that didn't quite match his years. He didn't fidget. He didn't glance around nervously. He stared straight ahead. Inside, the final hearing for the Safe Start investigation was about to begin. It wasn't just about adoption fraud anymore. It was about conspiracy, racketeering, child endangerment, and the systematic dismantling of truth. Tyrese was set to give a brief statement. Evelyn had left the decision up to him, and he had chosen unwaveringly to speak. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back row, their pens and recorders at the ready. Survivors, families, social workers, and law students filled every seat. Judge Sophia Brennan, a no-nonsense federal judge known for her integrity, presided. Cameras had been barred, but the nation would still hear every word. Assistant U.S. Attorney Kevin Diaz stepped up first, outlining the scope of the corruption. 317 confirmed cases of fraudulent adoptions, 41 children still unaccounted for, millions laundered through fake nonprofits and shell foundations. He presented evidence, falsified death certificates, altered hospital records, gag orders placed on whistleblowers. Then Evelyn stood, not as a judge, but as a mother. "I once thought the worst thing that could happen to me was losing my child," she said, voice steady. "I was wrong. The worst thing was learning years later that he had been stolen, and that I had trusted the very system that made it happen." She paused, letting the weight of that sentence settle over the room. "But I'm not here today just because I'm a mother. I'm here because I'm a citizen, a public servant, and a witness to what happens when we stop questioning convenience and start ignoring pain." Finally, it was Tyrese's turn. He stepped onto the wooden platform and adjusted the microphone awkwardly. The room held its breath. "I used to think being quiet was safer," he said. "Every time I tried to tell someone the truth, they looked away, like my words were too heavy for their ears." He held up the creased photograph, the same one he'd carried since the group home, now laminated and framed. "This picture saved my life, because I kept it, because I believed the face in it meant something." He looked directly at the judge. "And because someone finally listened." Murmurs echoed through the courtroom. Even Judge Brennan's stern face softened. Tyrese didn't say much more. He didn't need to. The silence after his final word felt louder than any closing argument. After his statement, the court heard from 2 more families who had been reunited with children lost years ago, thanks to the FBI's new initiative and a growing DNA database funded by seized assets from the trafficking ring. Dozens more were still searching. But for the first time, they weren't searching alone. The ruling came swiftly. Full federal charges were to be pursued against the entire Safe Start leadership, former Judge Harold Redding, and a dozen complicit doctors and hospital executives. Bail was denied. When Evelyn and Tyrese stepped out of the courtroom, a cluster of press awaited them. "Judge Carter, can we ask what's next for you?" She paused, then said clearly, "We build, we support families, and we hold every part of the system accountable, from the hospital to the bench. A smaller, quieter voice added, "And we help kids not feel lost anymore." Tyrese had stepped forward, unafraid. The moment was broadcast live across the country. By evening, the clip had gone viral. Tyrese Told the Truth began trending on every major platform. Messages flooded in, some from families looking for their own missing children, others from whistleblowers who had been too afraid to speak before. That night, back home, Evelyn and Tyrese sat together in the kitchen, finishing bowls of cereal at 10 p.m. "You think it's over?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not over, just beginning something better." "You think we'll help more kids?" "I know we will." He considered that for a moment, then reached into his backpack and pulled out a sheet of notebook paper. It was the start of a speech, something he wanted to give at the next National Children's Rights Summit. She scanned the first few lines and smiled through the tears. Tyrese's words, written in blocky, careful handwriting, read, "I remembered who I was because someone let me speak. That's how I found my mom. That's how I found myself. Let every kid speak. And maybe they'll find home too." As Evelyn tucked him into bed later, he asked, "You gonna go back to court?" "Maybe someday," she said. "But right now, my job is to be your mom and help make sure no other mom has to go through what we did." Outside, the city pulsed with headlines, news coverage, and breaking reports. But inside that small house, there was peace. A mother and her son, no longer separated by silence, lies, or fear. They had broken a system built to bury the truth and exposed a truth too powerful to ignore. For everyone watching this, if you believe in the strength of stories like Tyrese's, if you believe that love, memory, and truth can tear down even the darkest systems, then don't just listen, share it. Support families still searching. Speak up when it's easier to stay quiet. Because one boy's confession didn't just freeze a courtroom, it melted an entire nation's silence and helped bring hundreds of children home. If you're moved by this story, hit that like button, subscribe, and share. Help us shine a light on the stories that still need to be told. Because the next voice we help amplify might be the one still waiting to be heard. See you in the next story.